The weeks following Alvarez's fall were a brutal education in the mechanics of power. Leo sat in his father's office, surrounded by ledgers, coded messages, and the constant hum of a secure line that never stopped ringing. He had purged Alvarez's loyalists, replacing them with men and women who had proven their loyalty through years of quiet service. But each replacement revealed another layer of the organization's rot. The note that had been slipped under his door, "You have taken one head, but the Hydra has 7 more," haunted him like a prophecy he could not escape. He had interrogated Alvarez before he was taken to the chambers beneath the estate, but the former council leader had only laughed, his voice hoarse and broken. "You think I was the mastermind? I was a puppet, boy. The real power sits in a chair you have never seen, in a city you have never visited. El Arquitecto. He built this empire, and he will tear it down before he lets you inherit it." Leo had pressed for more, but Alvarez had clammed up, retreating into a silence that no threat or promise could penetrate. Now Leo sat alone, the weight of the interrogation pressing down on him. El Arquitecto. The architect. A name that existed in whispers, in the margins of documents that had been partially burned, in the memories of old men who flinched when they heard it spoken aloud. Leo knew that he was not fighting a single enemy, but a network of shadows, and that every move he made was being watched and measured by a mind far more patient and calculating than his own. Diego entered the office, his face drawn and tired, carrying a folder that bulged with photographs and transcripts. "I have been digging into Alvarez's past, following the money trail he left behind. He was receiving regular payments from a shell corporation based in the Southern Territories, a company that does not appear in any official register. The corporation is owned by a holding company, which is owned by another holding company, and so on, until the trail goes cold. But I found something else. A meeting that Alvarez attended 6 months before your father's assassination. The meeting was held in a private villa on the coast, and the guest list included several names that have been associated with El Arquitecto's inner circle." Leo took the folder and studied the photographs, his eyes scanning the faces of men and women who had been frozen in time, their expressions revealing nothing. He stopped at a photograph of Isabella Reyes, standing in the background of one of the images, her face partially obscured by a pillar. He looked up at Diego, his voice tight. "Isabella was at this meeting?" Diego nodded, his expression grim. "She was there, but that does not necessarily mean she was involved. She was your father's ally, and she has been consistently loyal to your cause since you arrived. But her presence at that meeting is a coincidence that I cannot ignore." Leo set the photograph down, his mind racing. He had begun to trust Isabella, to see her as a potential ally, but the image of her standing in the shadows of a villa where his father's fate had been sealed was a crack in that trust that he could not ignore. He summoned Isabella to his office, choosing his words carefully as she entered. She looked as composed as ever, her dark eyes assessing him with the same sharp intelligence that had marked their first meeting. He placed the photograph on the desk between them and watched her reaction. She did not flinch, did not look away, but a subtle tightening of her jaw told him that she recognized the image. "I was at that meeting," she said, her voice calm and steady, "and I have been waiting for you to ask me about it. The meeting was not a conspiracy. It was an attempt to warn your father. I had received intelligence that El Arquitecto was planning to move against him, and I arranged the meeting to pass along that information. Your father did not believe me. He thought I was trying to manipulate him to gain more power for myself. He was wrong, and he paid for that mistake with his life." Leo studied her face, searching for any flicker of deception, but her eyes remained clear and unwavering. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of the evidence was heavy, and the stakes were too high for blind faith. "If you were trying to warn him, why did you not tell me this sooner?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Isabella leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because I did not know if you would believe me.
and because I have been watching you, testing you, trying to determine if you are the leader your father hoped you would become. You have passed every test I have given you, Leo. Now I am ready to tell you the truth about El Arquitecto and about your mother." The mention of his mother sent a jolt through Leo's chest. He had not dared to hope that she might still be alive, but the possibility had been a constant, quiet ache in the back of his mind. "What do you know about my mother?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Isabella's expression softened, and for the first time, Leo saw a hint of the vulnerability that lay beneath her armor. "Your mother's name is Lucia. She was a simple woman, a seamstress who caught your father's eye when he was still a rising lieutenant in the organization. He loved her more than he loved power, and that made him vulnerable. When El Arquitecto began to consolidate his control, he knew that your father would never be a willing pawn, so he targeted the people your father loved. Your mother was not killed in the car accident, Leo. She escaped. Your father arranged for her to disappear, to take on a new identity, and to live far away from the violence that consumed his life. I helped him do it." Leo's head spun, the revelations colliding with each other like tectonic plates. His mother was alive, and Isabella had been the one to save her. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Isabella shook her head. "I cannot tell you, not yet. El Arquitecto's network is vast, and if he discovers that you are looking for her, he will find her before you do. But I can give you a lead, a name, a location, a place where you can begin your search. It is a risk, but it is the only way to find her before El Arquitecto does."
The lead was a small village in the mountains, a remote settlement that did not appear on any official map. Leo set out the next morning, accompanied only by Diego and a driver he trusted implicitly. The journey was treacherous, winding through narrow roads that clung to the edges of cliffs, and the weather turned against them, a sudden storm that reduced visibility to a few meters. But Leo did not turn back. He was driven by a desperation that bordered on obsession, a need to find the woman who had given him life, to hear her voice, to understand why she had left him behind. When they finally arrived at the village, it was a ghost town, its houses abandoned and its streets choked with weeds. Leo walked through the empty streets, his heart sinking with each step. He found the house that Isabella had described, a small cottage with a collapsed roof and a door that hung from a single hinge. He pushed it open and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The cottage was empty, but it was not abandoned. There were fresh footprints in the dust and a pot of water that was still warm. Someone had been here recently, and they had left in a hurry. Diego knelt beside the fireplace and pulled out a charred piece of paper, its edges curling from the heat. On it, a single word was written in a trembling hand: "Help." Leo stared at the word, his blood turning to ice. His mother had been here, and she had been taken. The footprints led out the back door into a dense forest that stretched up the mountainside. Without hesitation, Leo followed them, his body moving on autopilot, his mind a single focused point of determination. Diego followed, his pistol drawn, his eyes scanning the tree line. They followed the trail for an hour until they reached a clearing where a group of armed men waited, their faces hidden behind balaclavas. Leo's heart seized, but he did not stop. He walked toward them, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I am looking for my mother," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I know she is here. Let me see her." One of the men stepped forward, pulling off his balaclava to reveal a face that was familiar, a face from the photographs in the folder, a face that belonged to one of the men who had attended the villa meeting. "You are the heir," the man said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "We have been waiting for you. Your mother is safe for now, but she will only remain safe if you do exactly as we say." Leo felt his fists clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. The man smiled, a thin, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes. "We want you to come with us, alone. If you try to fight, or if you bring your man, your mother will die. The choice is yours."
Leo turned to Diego, his eyes conveying a message that did not need words. Diego's face was a mask of controlled fury, but he nodded, stepping back and lowering his weapon. Leo walked toward the armed men, his heart pounding, and allowed them to bind his hands and cover his eyes with a blindfold. He was led through the forest for what felt like hours, stumbling over roots and rocks, until he was finally pushed into a room that smelled of damp earth and burning wood. The blindfold was removed, and he found himself in a small cabin, its walls lined with crude shelves and maps. At the center of the room, a woman sat in a wooden chair, her hands bound, but her eyes sharp and defiant. She was older than he had imagined, her hair streaked with gray, and her face lined with the hardships of a life lived in hiding. But there was no mistaking the resemblance. She had his eyes, his jaw, the same stubborn set of his shoulders. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I never thought I would see you again. I had hoped you would never have to find me." Leo rushed to her, his hands still bound, and knelt before her, the tears streaming down his face. "I have been looking for you my whole life," he said, his voice breaking. "I did not know you were alive. I did not know any of it." Lucia reached out and touched his face, her fingers cold but gentle. "I know, my son. I know, and I am so sorry that you had to find me this way." The man who had led them to the cabin, whose name he learned was Vargas, entered the room and stood over them with a cold, calculating look. "You have found your mother, Heir, but you have not found the truth. Your father was not a victim of El Arquitecto. He was a willing collaborator. He helped build the Hydra, and he only turned against it when he realized that El Arquitecto planned to replace him. Your father was not a good man, Leo. He made terrible choices, and he hurt many people. But he loved you. He loved you more than anything, and he wanted to protect you from the life he had built. That is why he sent me away, and that is why he gave you to the people who raised you." Leo felt the world tilt beneath him, the foundations of his identity cracking and shifting. He had built his entire quest around the memory of a father who had been a martyr, a man who had died for his principles. But the truth was far messier, far more complicated, and far more human.
Vargas offered him a deal. Help him dismantle the remaining heads of the Hydra, and he would let Leo and his mother go free. Leo had no choice but to accept, his mind racing with the implications of the bargain. He would be working with the enemy, betraying the legacy of a father who had been both a monster and a protector. But the alternative was to watch his mother die, and that was not an option. Over the next few days, Leo worked with Vargas's men, feeding them information about the factions that had remained loyal to the Hydra, orchestrating raids and assassinations that decimated the organization he had once hoped to unite. He felt like a traitor, a puppet dancing on strings that were not his own, but he told himself that he was doing it to save the only family he had left. The final target was Isabella. Vargas had identified her as the last remaining head, the one who had been running the Hydra's operations from the shadows. Leo was tasked with luring her into a trap, using his position as the heir to convince her that he was ready to form an alliance that would consolidate her power. He hated himself for the deception, but he went through with it, arranging a meeting at the old villa on the coast, the same villa where his father's fate had been sealed. The meeting was set for midnight, and Leo arrived early, his hands shaking and his heart heavy with guilt. He waited in the villa's great hall,
the same room where the photographs had been taken. And when Isabella walked through the door, her face was pale and her eyes were filled with a terrible knowledge. "I know what you have done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that you have been working with Vargas and that you are here to kill me. But I am not your enemy, Leo. I am your ally, and I have been trying to protect you from the very people you are now helping. Vargas is el arquitecto. He has been playing you from the beginning, using your mother as a pawn to eliminate his rivals." Leo stared at her, his mind reeling. "That is impossible," he said, his voice hollow. "He told me he was working against the architect." Isabella shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "He lied. Your mother is not a hostage. She is a collaborator. She has been working with him for years, feeding him information about the organization, hoping to destroy it from within. She hates your father for what he did to her, and she wants to see everything he built burn. I am sorry, Leo. I am so sorry." The words hung in the air, and as Leo processed them, the doors of the villa burst open, and Vargas entered with a dozen armed men, his face a mask of triumph. "You see, Heir, the truth is always more complicated than you imagine, and now that you know, you are no longer useful to me. Your mother has served her purpose, and you have served yours. I am sorry it has to end this way." Leo felt the floor fall away beneath him, the final pieces of his identity crumbling into dust. He had been a puppet, a fool, a weapon wielded by the very people he had sworn to destroy. But even as the armed men closed in, he saw Isabella reach into her coat, her hand emerging with a small silver object that she pressed into his palm. "Run, and do not look back." He did not hesitate. He ran, the sound of gunfire echoing behind him, and the night swallowed him whole. He did not know if Isabella survived, did not know if his mother was truly a traitor, but he knew that the Hydra was not a metaphor. It was real, and it had been devouring him from the inside out. As he crashed through the forest, his lungs burning and his heart shattered, he made a silent vow. He would find the truth, no matter how ugly it was, and he would tear the Hydra down, piece by piece, even if it meant destroying himself in the process.